This is a podcast that seeks justice. Justice for the lives stolen by those in society that hide amongst us every day. Hidden in our towns, cities, and countrysides, the places that we work, and sometimes in our very own homes. This is Hidden Killers.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Tony Brewski. Be sure to press subscribe wherever you download podcasts so you don't miss any of our discussions on the cases that we are following. Today we're talking about the Bryan Kohberger murder case and the Idaho 4 that were murdered with Kate Wallinga, forensic psychologist and host of the Ignorance Was Bliss podcast. Kate, thanks for joining us. There's been a lot that has been coming out over the last couple of days, specifically about the killings in Idaho, and specifically about the order in which the victims were stabbed. Kohberger allegedly killing Madison and Kaylee first, after that killing Ethan, and finally Zaina. From the viewpoint of his mindset and psyche, is there any importance into the chronological order of these killings?
I'm not familiar enough with how frequently Ethan stayed there to know whether that was an expected thing, but most violent crimes, you take out your perceived either quietest, easiest victims, and I sure hate those words, but that's how they think, or you take out the biggest threat. And if it's in the middle of the night and you think they're all asleep, then go for the quiet ones first. And so it kind of makes sense to me that I found a couple of girls, they're smaller than him, doesn't strike as a huge threat. The biggest threat turned out to be, the girl that fought back. And people make a big deal out of, these two remaining roommates that were left downstairs. And I have to wonder, how badly did it shake him up that his script got destroyed?
Do you think his script was to kill everyone in the house, including the ones downstairs?
I've no idea. Why not? That seems like a logical thing to do. Why, if he wanted to play a horror movie type role, then the answer is to just go in and silently kill one person and leave. That's not what he did. And so it's not fundamentally logical to do something like this, to enact this level of rage and violence and not at least do a check. And instead he just left. And I have to wonder, that feels as though a part of him was shaken. Something that I think a lot of people don't understand is that, I'm not questioning who the victim is here. Don't get me wrong on that. But killing another person, especially in hand-to-hand violence, is hard and traumatizing all by itself to the perpetrator. It creates sounds and smells and fears and atavistic reactions that you can't really prepare for, and it can stay with you. And I think there's a fair number of perpetrators across the world who believed they could just cold-bloodedly go through and do the thing, whatever the thing was going to be, and then wander off, no problem. And instead, things like adrenaline kick in, and adrenaline interferes with your ability to think clearly. And you panic. You reach a point where you're like, I got to get out. I got to get out while I'm still ahead. Because I've lost the thread here. I'm no longer fully confident that I am in charge of what's going on in this building.
It's almost like they believe they have this, they're going into this superpower feeling, and then it slowly gets drained every time they take one of them out. And after you go through 4, do you think in him it was almost, the confidence was gone, it was too much? I
don't know if slowly is the way I would think about it, because if everything went exactly according to plan in any, like, I'm trying to think of, like, say an art project that you want to do, sculpture, and you're doing it and it's going pretty well, and you get 90% of the way there and you discover a crack in the foundation. And some people will figure out, shore that up and fix it and make it better. And other people will get frustrated and angry and throw it on the floor.
Yeah.
And so that's not a slow loss of focus or empowerment for the project. That's a difference in how you cope with the situation. I not having been there, I don't know if the suspect had time to regroup for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And to think, or if he had entered into a full panic state. But the point is, it's not like, at number 1, I have 100% energy, and after that, I have 75% energy and in a steady decline. It's possible to run on full adrenaline, full out, getting it done, but then something goes wrong, and you don't have the mindset or capacity or rationality or just intelligence to think on the fly.
Is it traumatizing for every perpetrator who does these sort of things, or are there some where it means no more than pouring a cup of coffee?
I think trauma means different things to different people. So it's not all PTSD trauma like we think of for veterans or victims of violence, although it can be. It can look just like that. It can have the intrusive memories and nightmares and sudden phobias and fears and difficulty in crowds or difficulty being alone. Like, there's a lot of markers that can make it clinically appear almost the same. And that's one of the reasons why we ask people, what brings you here? Like, what was the starting point of this? Because it matters,
sure,
of course. Which side of the knife were you on? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So sometimes it looks almost indistinguishable. Other times it's more like a bruise or a scar to the ego. There are we all knew that kid. I might have been that kid. I don't know. I hope not. But I might have been that kid in elementary school who got mad if I didn't get 100% on a spelling test and just would kind of fall apart.
Yeah.
And I was never a fall apart kid on the outside, just based on my personality. I've always had a little bit more of a poker face. But I can picture, I'm not going to name names, but I can picture kids that were in school with me where I would be like, dude, it's a B.
Yeah.
You're doing fine. But they couldn't, the slightest indication that they're not perfect or that their plan is not going perfectly can just knock them off their foundation. And that's not an emotional feeling in the same way for everybody. But for me, again, because it's the best reference I can give, I don't especially care when I get things wrong. I get things wrong all the time. If it's something really important, like having to do with my work or my parenting or that kind of thing, then I make extra careful that I've gone through it several times and I have, crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's and really just been clear to protect myself from error. But there are other times where you're at the grocery store and you grab the wrong kind of milk.
Sure.
Or something like that. And that kind of screw up, when I stutter, when I drop something, whatever, that doesn't bother me so much. It's just well, there's the thing you got to deal with now. It is what it is. There are other people for whom that kind of error, that kind of blow to the ego is harder for them to cope with than if they had like a hard breakup.
Sure. Is that something that is instilled like in childhood and the parenting that you received of expectations of behavior and performance, or is that something that comes more so it's just in your DNA and that's just how you function?
I don't believe in nature versus nurture. I think it's both. It's always both.
Okay.
I think that one of the reasons that I don't believe in it is that it's not so much with the nurture part, with how your parents are raised. It honestly doesn't matter as much how you raise your children, what words you say, how it's done. It matters how the child perceives it.
Mm-hmm.
And you only have so much control over that.
Sure.
And there's a lot of times where you'll hear perpetrators from a large family, for instance, and there's no other violence in the family.
Yeah.
They all had the same excellent or the same terrible parents, and there's no other violence in the family. Why is that? Well, it's because something about this one kid's perception of their childhood is different.
That's interesting. That's a really interesting way of looking at it. I mean, I guess an analogy would be every child would be, okay, picture different types of paper that you can write on, from toilet paper to cardboard. And you take that same marker and you mark the same mark on each one of them. One of them, strong, it holds up, it's right there. Go to the toilet paper, it bleeds right through and literally breaks the paper. Everybody has a different level of which they will take that sort of criticism or parenting or whatever you want to call it, or input, and the way it affects them is very different, even though it's the exact same thing with all said forms of paper.
Exactly. And human memory is terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I can speak to it myself. My husband and I used to live on a busy intersection directly across from the hospital. And so there were a lot of either hit and runs or fairly low speed, but definitely car accidents. Mm-hmm. And this is the point where we just got used to, we always kept one phone on the windowsill overlooking there so that we could try to call as soon as we heard the inevitable sound of the crash that happened. And it was not this is not like a daily thing, let me be clear, but maybe once a month, twice a month, something. It was often enough that we had a plan in place about how do you cope with it. And it was not uncommon in that maybe a quarter of the time where the police would say, "What color was the car that drove away?" And my husband would say with full certainty and confidence, "Red." And I'd be like, "No, it was black." And I mean, here's a case where we're not lying.
Yeah.
And there's no malice here or intention to complicate the situation. It's just that maybe one of us saw the headlight or the tail lights rather, and the other saw a shadow over something, or or that kind of like memory is squishy, and then as soon as it's encoded, now it's really, really hard to change.
Sure.
And so, like, I know that I have two younger sisters, and I know that they have very, very different perspectives of our parents than I do. And the answer is we don't talk about that.
Sure.
Because it doesn't help. It doesn't.
Yes.
It doesn't. I don't want to damage their relationship with my father died in 2019, but my mother is still alive, and I don't want to damage their relationship with her. But I don't want to feel pressed into returning into a relationship with someone that I have decided I can't healthily engage with.
Sure.
Right. And so it's that feeling, that core feeling of like, I have a sense of who this person is and how they think about me. We can all have been exposed. We were all exposed to the same people, but we walked away with very, very different memories.
Sure. Kate Wallinga, forensic psychologist and host of the Ignorance Was Bliss podcast. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us your insights today on the subject of Bryan Kohberger and the Idaho murders. Be sure to press subscribe wherever you download podcasts so you don't miss any of our episodes. You can get a commercial-free experience through Apple Podcasts right now. Even try that for 3 days free. You can follow me on Twitter for more on this case and others. I'm at Tony B Pod on Twitter. I'm Tony Bruschi. For all of us here, thanks for listening.